All right, we're there in 2 Samuel chapter 4, short chapter there. Before we get into it, we'll review chapter 3. Chapter 3 is basically when Joab and his brother murder Abner. So that's kind of what it's about. Abner sees that House of David's getting stronger, who's over Judah, and House of Saul is getting weaker. So Abner basically conspires to join up. He goes into Ishbosheth's concubine, or Saul's concubine. Ishbosheth calls him out, and then he basically turns on Ishbosheth, and he's going to help to unite the two. And then in that process, Joab doesn't like that David is treating him kindly, so he calls him back and kills him. And then the whole second part of this basically is David trying to clear his name, saying that he didn't have anything to do with it. It's kind of a political move. Talked about the fact that Joab should be put to death for cold-blooded murder, but he's not. And we talked about a few other things in that chapter. That's basically where we're at. I think that chapter 4 and chapter 3 are in some ways, parts of it are a little bit in parallel, overlapping. But before we get into it, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thanks so much for this opportunity to preach to the people. Just pray that you help me out. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So look at 2 Samuel 4:1. It says, "And when Saul's son heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, his hands were feeble, and all the Israelites were troubled." So I think this could be basically before David has gone to all that trouble to clear his name. They basically hear Abner was trying to do these things, unite Israel. And remember, if you remember, he was talking amongst Israelites and people of Benjamin before he went to David. And possibly they don't know that David went to all this trouble to clear his name, and maybe they suspect that David had something to do with the death of Abner. But I think we can clearly see here that Ishbosheth's, who's Saul's son here, his strength was really in Abner. All right, he wasn't a powerful leader. People didn't fear Ishbosheth. People didn't follow Ishbosheth. He was a figurehead that Abner, as the man behind the scenes, put in place to basically lift up his house, preserve his name, preserve, his power. And now without Abner, it's kind of like he has no protection from his enemies, without and within. He has probably very little guidance in terms of politics. And it kind of makes me understand that Ishbosheth really wasn't fit to rule over the nation, because as soon as his uncle's gone, he doesn't know what to do. That's not the guy that you want to lead your country, right? The one who's completely dependent on somebody else. You want the guy who's not dependent on everybody else and can actually make decisions. That's who you want to run your country. Go to Matthew 10. I think that probably Ishbosheth should have said, hey, Abner, I don't want to be king. I'm not the guy, If you want to keep it in the house of Saul, why don't you be king? But he didn't do that. To be honest, sometimes there's situations that you really can't do anything about. I know in some situations with family, there's no way out. You just got to do whatever you're told. Let's go to Matthew 10. But I think Abner, it seems that maybe he had a reputation. You remember the way that Joab talked about him in the previous chapter? About basically he can't be trusted. He's going to basically find you, watch to see when you go in and when you come out, and then he's going to take advantage of you, David. That's what Joab was saying about Abner. I think Abner had and remember he commanded the Benjamites to basically murder those 12 dudes when they went out to play. That's the way that I see it. I don't think he's really a guy that can be trusted. I think he's kind of a conniving person. And what I would say is Ishbosheth probably knew his uncle and should have been aware that maybe he was being used and he was a pawn in his big game, okay? And I just want to make the point, some advice, life advice, be aware that you might be getting scammed or played or hustled, okay? Because I think Ishbosheth is kind of walking into this disaster where I think the entire nation of Israel knows that David is supposed to be king. And then Abner, his uncle, is basically putting him in here. They must have had some conversations about it. But there's going to be times in your life when there's going to be people that are trying to take advantage of you for their own personal gain. Okay?
Yeah.
Matthew 10:16 says, "Before I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves, be therefore wise as serpents and harmless as doves." The way I see this is we should understand the way that the world operates and the way that people in the world operate. You know, people, it's like, if the deal's too good to be true, maybe it's too good, maybe it's not a good deal. You know what I mean? Because there are going to be wicked people in our life that try to take advantage of us and take advantage of other people, take advantage of the Christians. How many people are taken advantage of in these churches to let their you've heard stories and preachers preach about it, letting their kids stay over at someone else's house because they go to church. And you don't know what's going to happen over there.
No.
You know there's going to be wolves that creep into churches. I would say don't let your kids stay over at anyone's house in here. That's the safest bet. You know, there's people in here that I trust. But you know what? I mean, at what point? I'm not going to, sorry guys, if I have like a 4-year-old child, I'm not going to trust my 4-year-old child to stay over at your house.
Right.
You know what I mean? We just got to be careful. We don't want to live in like this life with a totally negative outlook, but we don't want to just be these dumb people that don't understand that there are wicked people who want to take advantage of us. Wicked people trying to take advantage of others' ignorance, trust, naivete. What is it? Being naive. Happens a lot. I mean, can you imagine? You know those scam calls you get? There's a reason that they're calling so much. It's because there's people that actually fall for it. I watched this one video about these scammers that they were like, you need to mail $30,000 to this address. So these guys are like, all right, we're gonna go mail a package there, and it's not gonna have the money. And then has anyone seen this? And then we're gonna show up at the door when FedEx delivers it, and we're gonna knock on the door and we're gonna see what's going on. And you know what happened? It was this old lady that had been promised by the scammers that she was gonna get 30 grand of her $80,000 back, or maybe she'd given the scammers $30,000, and she still believed that the scammers were good people. She probably lost that, and they end up getting together and giving the lady the money back by one of these GoFundMe things. I guarantee that lady's lost it to another scammer. It's like these people just don't get it, you know what I mean? Don't fall for these things. Ishbosheth fell for this. He got scammed. He got hustled by his uncle. You know, his uncle was using him. You know, be careful. The world's a crazy place. We just need to be aware of these things. We don't want to be someone that can never trust anybody, but we just limit how much we can trust people. Okay, you can trust people with $20, but don't trust them with $20,000. And you see that the Israelites were trouble too. And kind of what that makes me think is that maybe Israel thought that David meant to kill Abner. Maybe David, because that would be if you're outside of the situation, Abner goes off over there to do negotiations and he doesn't come back, you'd be like, that didn't go so well. David might have a problem with us. We better watch out. So I kind of think that parts of this are happening in parallel to the previous chapter. Maybe they think that David's just going to take Israel by force, which kind of makes sense with the ongoing actions of these two brothers, when they're trying to cover themselves and get right with David by doing something that David isn't pleased with. Actually, if you look at 2 Samuel 3:19, 3:19 says, and Abner also spake. Remember in the previous verse it says that he went into all Israel, or 17 elders of Israel, and then 19. And Abner spake in the ears of Benjamin, and Abner went also to speak in the ears of David and Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel, and that seemed good to the whole house of Benjamin. He went to Israel, and Benjamin was like, okay, what do you think we should do here? Let's talk about things. Let's figure out what I'm going to say. I'm going to go over there. I'm going to negotiate these things. Hey, we're all going to keep everything. You all keep your stuff. You keep your stuff, but then he's just going to be king over us. There's probably some discussions they had. Abner goes off, and they might have been like, he didn't accept our offer. That could be where maybe they're thinking that he wanted to just destroy all those tribes, the 11 other tribes, and just take everything. I mean, speculation, but you can see that they're scared. They're scared that it's kind of like they're scared that David's going to come for them. 2 Samuel 4, verse 2. And Saul's son had two men, so this is Ishbosheth, were captain of bands. Now bands, I always think of like little like pirate groups, like, the bands roving around and just ransacking things. But basically, two groups, they're basically captains. Doesn't sound like they're not like captains of hundreds, but there's some guys, they got some authority. The name of one was Baana, and the name of the other Rechab, the sons of Rimmon, a Beerothite, of the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth also is reckoned to Benjamin, and the Beerothites fled to Gittaim and were sojourners there until this day. So this is just showing like their background, where they're from. There's two brothers, and they served under him. And Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son that was lame of his feet. He was 5 years old when the tidings came of Saul and Jonathan out of Jezreel. So this is going back. Remember when Saul and Jonathan died? I think it's like 1 Samuel 31. When he died, Jonathan out of Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled, and it came to pass, as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame, and his name was Mephibosheth. So when he was a little boy when his dad and his grandfather died, and his nurse, which I just imagine is like the woman who takes care of him, was fleeing with him, dropped him. I don't know how you drop someone so that like his legs just got really, basically he becomes handicapped through this accident. And I think the reason that it's bringing it up, let's go to 1 Chronicles 20. I suspect that the reason it's bringing it up is it's kind of like he wasn't, in their eyes, he wasn't really fit to be king. Okay? So it's kind of like with Ishbosheth gone, it's kind of like the last guy that possibly could have led from the house of Saul is kind of passed. That it's kind of implying that Ishbosheth or Mephibosheth is not really fit to be king. If you remember when Saul was made king, he looked good. He's big. He's impressive. You want a king that's like big and impressive. You don't want some king you don't want a Joe Biden who can't talk. It's an insult. It makes the U.S. look weak when you have a leader that can't even put words together. What is it? One word that defines America? Like, what does that do when you put an old geezer up there like that? And hey, you know what? There's 93-year-old. I was watching this video. This 93-year-old guy who could recall every single name of everybody that he's ever met. So it's not Joe Biden's age. The guy's lost his brain. Okay, and you put this guy up here, and what does it do? It makes the U.S. look weak. Okay, and in this case, a physically handicapped king would make Israel look weak. That's why they like Saul. David was a good-looking guy. He could slay all kinds of Philistines. He could kill lots of people. He could fight battles. Impressive, the type of person you want to lead over you. And if you look 1 Chronicles 21, this is remember when David stays back and he falls into the sin with Bathsheba. 1 Chronicles 20, verse 1. I think that's what it's talking about here. Anyways, it could be another chapter, but that's not why I'm looking here. It says, 1 Chronicles 20, verse 1. And it came to pass that after the year was expired, at the time that kings go out to battle, Joab led forth power of the army and wasted the country and the children of Ammon, and came and besieged Rabbah. But David tarried at Jerusalem, and Joab smote Rabbah and destroyed it. The purpose of the king is to go out and lead, physically. Lead in battles and do fighting. And if you can't walk, if you need to be carried, if you need to be walked around, at this time I don't think you're really fit in the eyes of the people to be king. All right? I think that's just how it is. I think it's kind of implied in this case of Mephibosheth. The reason it's bringing it up is he wasn't really fit to be king in Ishbosheth's case, because being a king is physically demanding. Now, I'd say that today it's not really a problem. No one voted for Stephen Hawking for president. Who'd want Stephen Hawking? Let's say you don't want Stephen Hawking as president, right? Who knows what the people are going to program him to say? They're going to be like with Joe Biden, they just got to chase people out, but with Stephen Hawking, they'll just some hacker will hack in there, But it is a truth And it might be wrong, because, physical handicap shouldn't, change our opinion about people. But I'll tell you what, if you have a physically handicapped person leading a country, people will look at it as a sign of weakness, as a representation of that country. If you FDR, anybody know FDR? I'll read something about him. Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Roosevelt. America was more accepting of a disabled politician than he had expected, with citizens sympathizing to his condition rather than embarrassed, according to the FDR Presidential Library and Museum. Yet Roosevelt was determined to keep images of his wheelchair use out of the public eye. I don't have what it is here. He had some kind of disease where he actually couldn't walk for a while, and then he had to train himself to strengthen himself. But he ended up using a wheelchair through his presidency. To keep images of his wheelchair use out of the public eye, concerned about the impact on public opinion at a time when many, at the very least, considered such a disability as a disqualification from high office. Now, why? That's strange, right? It's not like the President of the United States is going out and fighting battles, right? And I mean, if that was a disqualification, did anyone see Joe Biden fall when he was riding his bicycle? Disqualified, buddy. Secret Service agents would block the view of him using a wheelchair and would requisition and destroy. That means they would take and destroy pictures taken by journalists who tried to get around this. But most reporters respected the White House request for the president not to be photographed in a disabled or weak state. Why? Because it makes the United States look disabled or weak. And I think, first off, you got the demanding job of going out and actually fighting battles. That's a king's job. And we know that when David didn't go out and fight battles, it was bad, because that's when he fell into his sin of adultery with Bathsheba. And then, it represents just kind of this weakness of the state. You guys know I was listening to Pastor Thompson's sermon on King James. You know that King James was disabled as well? From the King James Bible. James had long suffered from extremely weak legs. He did not learn to walk until he was 5, and at the age of 18, he was still unsteady on his feet. By the time he ascended the English throne, he often leaned on the man next to him. James' legs may have been weakened in infancy by rickets. Alternatively, Frederick Holmes, emeritus professor of medicine at the University of Kansas, has proposed that James suffered from an hereditary neuromuscular disorder. Either way, the king was often happiest when he was in the saddle rather than on foot. So I think this is, technically it's not really a problem, but you don't see many handicapped people run for office. Right? It's just a fact. Even today, in our all-inclusive society, it's still, mentally, subconsciously, it's kind of a sign of weakness. That to have a handicap, or having Stephen Hawking as president of the United States would the United States would be total laughingstock. It would, right? There'd be memes about it all over the place. Even if he was a great person. That's kind of just the reality of the world we live in. So it just kind of gives that example there. So you got these two guys. I kind of skipped over it. Rechab and Baanah. It's just mentioning them, that they're there. And it says in verse number, 5? Verse number 5. And the sons of Rimmon, the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, went and came about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who lay on a bed at noon. So what I think is, what's happening here is it's hot out, and Ishbosheth, king, is chillaxing in his bed at noon. So, some things would say, well, this is, it's the hottest part of the day, and this is when he's taking his siesta. And what I would say is, you're the king of Israel, and Abner just died, and everybody's scared about what's going to happen. I don't think it's really time for a nap, Ishbosheth. Yeah. Man up, man up. We talked about being lazy earlier. If you don't work, you shouldn't eat. We shouldn't be slothful. We shouldn't be lazy. Maybe he's depressed. Hey, we all get there. Sometimes we need to relax. But that's also obviously it's going to be his sign of his time of weakness. But here's the thing: being lazy never solved anybody's problems. Did you know that? Sitting around and doing nothing, your problems might just kind of pass. And they might just kind of go away, but they're never solved. They'll probably just come back and bite you again. Okay? I used to work at this company, and we always have these process issues. When we get really busy, there'd be this massive bottleneck in the system. and then they'd meet and they talk about doing all these things. They never actually do anything, and then it wouldn't get as busy, and then there was no problem. And then they'd be like, hey, yay, there's no problem anymore. But they actually never did anything. So anytime we got busy, there's always a problem there because they never actually acted. So you know what? I mean, everybody wants to be busy. So because they didn't do anything, it never solved the problem. It just put it off. And, if there are major problems in your life, you need to just deal with them. And Ishbosheth, why are you on your bed at noon? I know it's hot, but you know what? Hey, who wanted to kick back and take a break today? I know I did. I would have loved to just be chilling somewhere and putting my feet up and relaxing, maybe even take a nap. But there's work to do. There's church, there's soul winning. It's not time for us to relax. Go to Proverbs 10. So you see this here where it's probably his daily schedule where when it's hot out, he's going to go and he's going to take a break and he's going to relax at noon. If you want responsibility and you want success and you want power and you want influence, right? You want influence. Brother Cleo preaching on this. You're not always going to get to take your nap. Sometimes you just need to work through. Sometimes you need to stay up late. Sometimes you need to get up early. Sometimes you don't need to take your break at work. Sometimes you're going to be so busy at work that it's like, hey man, I'm just going to work through. I'm just going to work through lunch. I'm not going to take a break. I'm just going to get it done. It's too busy. Hey, because you know what? It's the people that always take their cigarette breaks. You think the person takes their cigarette break every single hour? You think they're the one that really succeeds? No, because the boss looks at him, they're like, look at this guy. He's taking a break every hour. He's working 3/4 of everybody else. You ever worked with one of these people? It's crazy. I worked with a guy one time, and he didn't smoke, but he was just standing outside the building. I'm like, he was an old dude. He kind of looked like Yosemite Sam, a little bit. Like he had, I don't know. It's just he did. And I was out there, and I asked him like, hey, I was like, what are you doing? He said, I'm taking my cigarette break. And it's like, hey, man, non-smokers should get an extra, 5 days off a year. Seriously, right? Maybe it would add up that time. The Bible tells us to be diligent. Proverbs 10:4 says, he becometh poor that dealeth with the slack hand. This is a guy that doesn't deal with his problems. But the hand of the diligent maketh rich. You know what? If you're diligent means constant in effort to accomplish something, attentive and persistent in doing anything. It's like, just focused. I got something to do, just get it done. I'm at work and I'm like, man, I'm bored. I got to find something to do. I got to do something. I have to accomplish something today. There's this thing I was watching this thing about in China. They got this 996 plan. Everybody know about this? They work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. But they have this mentality, which is basically just get through the day. Do the minimum amount of work just to get through to the next day. So yeah, they're in work, what is that, 72 hours a week. But their mentality is just do the bare minimum just so I survive until tomorrow. That should not be our attitude. We should be diligent people where instead of taking a break at noon, hey, there's problems in the nation, I'm going to deal with them. I'm going to figure out what's going on. Oh, all of Israel, you're really scared? I'm scared too. Why don't we figure this thing out? Why don't we, go and say something, go and see David and see what's going on? I mean, wouldn't that have been the smart thing to do? If he's like, what in the world? And then he would have gone there and he probably would have gotten been totally welcome. They probably would have been like, hey, Ishbosheth. David would have just greeted him with open arms. You know that's what would have happened. Rechab and Baanah aren't resting. Because they got business to take care of, don't they? Proverbs 12:24 says, the hand of the diligent shall bear rule, but the slothful shall be under tribute, or in this case, dead. In tough times, you might not be able to sleep. My advice is just deal with problems before they get bigger, okay? It's like, I can't pay my bills. You can't pay your bills, but you got nights and weekends free. Maybe not Sunday. Well, then you can do something about it. I need a new job. You need a new job, but you never update your resume or put out feelers or done anything, right? You need a spouse, but if you need a spouse in this day and age, you need to look all around the world. Let's be honest, okay? Yeah, you start here, but you might need to look anywhere possible. right? These single girls, they just get snagged. You see a girl out in the field dancing, you just got to go over and grab her, okay? But hey, that's what it is, right? I mean, if you need something, you have to make things happen. There are going to be times when things just happen. Chance. If you're faithful, I think things will happen. But you know what? There's certain things that you actually need to put in the effort, and you need to make things happen. You can't just live your life assuming that God's just going to, put everything right in your hands and you're not going to do anything. Just do something. Just start. I don't know where to start. Well, just take one step. Just take one step, do that. But my point here is Ishbosheth was being lazy. He was sleeping in midday when there was business he should have taken care of. And that's kind of his downfall here. Let's look at 2 Samuel 4:6. And they came thither into the midst of the house as though they would have fetched wheat. I saw this one thing, and it said that they disguised themselves as merchants. It's like, what? Where is that from? Clearly they're just like going in to get wheat to feed like their band probably or something like that. Fetch wheat, and they smote him under the fifth rib, and Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. So they basically go in and they just cold-blooded murder the king of Israel in his bed. Who thinks that that's right? It's not. That's wicked. It's murder. All right? This is not. God did not tell them to do this. It is not of God. And here's an example of a conspiracy. Verse number 7. For when they came into the house, he lay on his bed in his bedchamber, and they smote him and slew him and beheaded him and took his head and gat them away through the plain all night. So they basically pretend it's like kind of like a James Bond style mission where they're going to like sneak in under the disguise of fetching wheat. They're just going to kind of somehow get into the king's bedchamber, kill him, and then they sneak out and then they escape into the night with his head. That's brutal. Okay. Now, why would they do that? Proof. They're taking his head as proof that they killed him, because they can't just come with words. They need to come with some kind of evidence. Go to Psalm 10. So what was their purpose here? Well, I think that they thought that David was coming, that David was going to take over, and that they were probably under threat of losing their job or possibly losing their life. Psalm 10. So what did they end up doing? They end up taking matters into their own hands. And just like this other guy, you remember, what was it, the Egyptian? No, it wasn't the Egyptian. The guy, what was he?
Amalekite?
The Amalekite, yeah, the Amalekite. He pretended that he killed Saul. Why did he do it? He wanted personal gain. He wanted a reward. He wanted something for himself. He wanted to use this wicked act to have personal gain for himself. And that's exactly what we see here. So there's actually been multiple examples of this from David, that he's not going to stand for anything like this. I mean, all throughout 1 Samuel, he's like, I'm not going to kill the Lord's anointed. I'm not going to take that and take his life into my own hands. I'm not going to do this. But they expect a reward from David. And I thought that this passage here kind of reminded me, or is kind of shows the type of people that these guys were. Psalm 10 verse 4. The wicked, through the pride of his countenance, will not seek after God. God is not in all his thoughts. His ways are always grievous. Thy judgments are far above, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he puffeth at them. He hath said in his heart, I shall not be moved, for I shall never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and fraud. Under his tongue is mischief and vanity. He sitteth in the lurking places of the villages. In the secret places doth he murder the innocent. His eyes are privily set against the poor. He lieth in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lieth in wait to catch the poor. He doth catch the poor where he draweth him into his net. He croucheth and humbleth himself, that the poor may fall by his strong ones. Now, Ishbosheth isn't poor, but you can see that they're these wicked people lurking about, secret places. They're hiding, they're deceiving, they're manipulating, murdering innocent people, and that's exactly what these guys are doing here. I mean, they don't understand who David is, because David is not going to reward someone for being wicked. We know that about David. David might not be perfect, but at least he understands right from wrong. So what they're going to do is they think that once they kill Ishbosheth, that they're going to go to David and show, hey, look what we did. Now reward us, give us some position in your authority structure, whatever, and that they're gonna do great things. Verse number 8, and they brought the head of Ishbosheth unto David to Hebron, and said to the king, behold, the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, thine enemy, which sought thy life. So this is Saul sought his life. And the Lord hath avenged my lord, the king, this day of Saul and of his deed. Now, again, they're like doing this like they're doing it of the Lord, like they're doing some righteous act, like as if David needs as if God needs their help. You know, it's like when Abner was like talking about all these righteous deeds that he was going to do. You know, oh, we're going to put David over, he's going to be king because that's what the Lord wanted. You know, he kind of was saying stuff like that. These wicked people always want to justify themselves as being righteous when they're just being wicked. Verse number 9, and David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother. Can you imagine being in this room? Can you imagine being one of David's men in this situation? And these two dudes come in and you're like, this isn't going to end well. Because they know what's going on, right? They understand who David is. Clearly, these two people don't understand who David is. Right. And David answered Rechab and Baanah, his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said unto them, as the Lord liveth, who hath redeemed my soul out of all adversity? God, not man. When one told me, saying, behold, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good tidings, I took hold of him and slew him in Ziklag, who thought that I would have given him a reward for his tidings. See, that's exactly what he wanted. He thought he was going to get personal gain, rewards, you know, that he was going to get some kind of, you know, possessions, things like that. How much more when wicked men have slain a righteous person? I mean, that guy like lied about it. These two actually, it says here, have slain a righteous person in his own house upon his bed. Shall I not therefore now require his blood of your hand and take you away from the earth? I mean, it doesn't get much worse. I'm sure Ishbosheth was probably sleeping, napping, resting, eyes closed, something like that. You know what I mean? And they go in and they basically just murder him in his sleep. That's like the lowest you can get. At least they could have been like, all right, Ishbosheth, get up, arm yourself. We're gonna do this. You know, at least there'd be a little bit of honor in that. And David commanded his young men, and they slew them, and cut off their hands and their feet, and hanged them up over the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in the sepulchre of Abner in Hebron. So, I mean, unfortunately, Ishbosheth is just kind of like a casualty. He was a pawn. He's being manipulated. He's being put in his place. And it's like nobody really cared about Ishbosheth. No one's like, what's good for Ishbosheth? Abner didn't care about him. The people didn't care about him. You know, so he's just a casualty. That's what happens when wicked people do things. People get hurt, and Ishbosheth that's him. So David makes just a really, apparently the message with the Amalekite was not strong enough. So he makes a very strong message here. He cuts their hands and their feet off and hangs their bodies up. So it's like, hey, if anybody has a question, like how I think about people who are trying to commit murder and do extremely wicked things and think that I'm going to reward them, like, just look at that. That's what's going to happen to you.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes we need to send strong messages to let people know that we're serious.
Yeah.
Right? And I guess the thing is that the first message, just doing it wasn't enough. You know? And I'd say that's what a lot of preaching is. My advice is, you know, you preach the dead body hanging on the wall with no feet and no hands before anybody goes out and kills Ishbosheth. That's the purpose of preaching, as far as I'm concerned. I always say, hey, you know what? I want to be blameless because I want to actually preach things before they become a problem. That's the best thing. Then people can be held accountable. I mean, these people are held accountable, but you know, it's like Not preaching about alcohol use. We don't want to just be like, don't do it. I mean, preach how wicked it is, and then maybe someone will actually be deterred from doing it. Being like, hey, that dead body with no hands and no feet, that's you drinking alcohol. You drink alcohol, you drink one glass, that's going to be you. You're going to be a dead body with no hands and no feet. And you're going to be a shame and a byword and a proverb unto all the people. Okay? That's what's going to happen. Smoking dope, same thing. And that's what we need to do as preachers. We need to get up and we need to preach those things. We need to preach things that edify and encourage and, motivate us. We need to preach good things, but we also need to be the watchmen that are warning people. Because sometimes just saying things lightly or dealing with something off on the side, that's why there was some drama that went on in the UK with the church plant over there, and I don't know all the details. I haven't talked to Pastor Thompson about all the details, but what happens after all things are kind of settled? What can often happen in times like that? The pastor gets up and names the names and says, hey, those people, don't do that. This is what happens. This is what they did. This is what will happen to you. That's why we need to say things like that. Strong message. We need to give people strong messages so that they never make the same mistake. David doesn't want to. You think David gets joy out of having to kill these people? Absolutely not. But he that's what they deserved. So David makes a really strong example of these two guys. Go to Ezekiel 3. It'll be an early one. Plenty of time for ping pong today. Or going home and resting before a long week. And kind of similar to that, we need to heed the warnings of the Bible. All the things that were written in there were written for us. We don't need to relive situations in the Bible or similar things. And then why would we relive things so to have God's judgment and God's anger poured out on us for doing things? I mean, how many people have gone through 1 Corinthians 5:11 and seen those verses and heard them preach and then committed those sins on there? I mean, pay attention, folks. Pay attention to the Bible. Listen to the preaching. Apply it in your life. Heed the warnings and examples in the Bible. Unlike these people up here, who obviously didn't pay attention to maybe they didn't know the example because it wasn't public enough. That's why we don't hide things, But we need to warn people. The church is here to warn people. Do this, don't do that. Watch out for this. Be prepared. That's what we need to do. We need to warn people, prepare ourselves. In our spiritual life, there's always going to be things that surprise us, and we're not sure how to deal with them. But the best we can, the church is here to prepare people to deal with different things so that we don't get into certain types of different problems. That's what our job is. We want to help people not make mistakes, and when there are issues, to deal with them. Okay? Ezekiel 3:17 says, Son of man, I have made thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore, hear the word at my mouth, and give them warning from me. When I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not warning, nor speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand. This is why, if you don't preach it, if you don't warn the people, it's on you, right? Yet if thou warn the wicked, and he turn not from his wickedness, nor from his wicked way, he shall die in his iniquity, but thou hast delivered thy soul. But you're good. It's man, I told you this was happening. I warned you. I warned you. If you do that, you heard preaching about this, and you decided to go against it. You decided that you're gonna move off into, I don't know, this place up there and make $25 at Timmy's. You're like, it's a great job. I get free housing. I'm gonna go up to the top of the northernmost point of Canada. I'm going to make $25 at Timmy's. I'm going to be able to eat all the Timmy's I want. I'm going to have almost no expenses. I'm going to save so much money. And we're going to be like, is there a good church up there? You shouldn't go there if there's no church. And you say, no, I'm going to do it anyway. And you know it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. That's why we're supposed to preach these things. People have free will, but you know what? That's why he does this. It's like he doesn't want people to do this. He doesn't want to have to. And here's the thing: David just doesn't want to have to deal with people like this again. He doesn't want to have to deal with the wickedness. That's why he's preaching, and that's why he's making this message, because he just doesn't want to have to deal with it. It's like that's why pastor preaches things. That's why preachers preach things, because they don't want to deal with drama. I mean, any pastor that loves to deal with drama, I don't think should be a pastor. I think pastors should hate drama. And you deal with it when it's there. You shouldn't back down from a fight. But they should not strive. The man of God should not be a brawler or strive with people. So I'll wrap it up in this chapter. Ishbosheth is murder. The murderers come to David for a reward, and then he puts them to death and makes an example of them. That's basically what happens. But now we talked about Mephibosheth. There's really no one to lead over him, so we'll see in the next chapter, probably 2 Samuel. I'm not even there. 2 Samuel 5, 1. All the tribes of Israel go to David and said, "Behold, we're thy bone and thy flesh," and then they join together, and they're all going to be together, one big happy family. So with Abner dead, I'll just summarize what we talked about. With Abner dead, Ishbosheth is vulnerable. There's no protection from enemies. That's what it seems like. There's no guidance from politics of being a king, which I think Abner was doing all those things. He was basically just like following him around. He's just a figurehead. Israel probably thought that David was going to meant them harm because of the death of Abner. Maybe they didn't understand. We talked about the fact that we shouldn't just be afraid of everybody, but we should be aware that there are wicked people out there that want to hustle us, scam us, play us, whatever it is. Like what these people who come into Baptist churches, Amway people. I've never had to deal with Amway people, but people want to come in here and be friends, go into churches to be friends just so that they can turn the people into merchandise. It happens. Mephibosheth is mentioned, talk about his handicap, which made him unfit to be king. Just I think that's kind of the picture it's painting. Ishbosheth is taking a nap in the middle of the day when I think he should be working to make peace with David and go to David and make sure that things are all right. But then that leaves him open to these two dudes, these two brothers, the Beerothites, that come in and kill him in his sleep, is what it seems like. Take his head, go to David. They think they're going to get a reward, just like the Amalekite. He's not going to stand for it. He puts him to death. Then he hangs him up there as an example. And then we talk about the fact that we need to send strong examples. Weak examples, like, just, you shouldn't do it. No, don't, please. No, you send a strong example, right? If you commit fornication, you will get kicked out of this church. No, like, well, you shouldn't do it. It's not good for you. I know there's health benefits, but there's also you open yourself up to this esophageal cancer. Possible. No, it's like you're gonna get kicked out. Okay, my son, you start drinking. Hope you have a place to live. Okay, good luck finding a roof over your head. Anyways, so send strong messages as a deterrent to prevent issues in the future. We preach hard so that we don't have problems. It's funny that preaching hard against sin and wickedness actually brings peace. Because when people know that the judgment is there, then they won't do those things. Okay? Like if there's some kid and he's like, man, you're going to be some filthy sodomite, reprobate, burning, splitting hell wide open, they're going to be like, I don't want to be like that. Why don't they teach that in school? Anyways, with that, let's pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this day.